Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a few more minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give everyone a few more minutes to hop on, and then we will get started with our webinar. All right, it's a few minutes after 1:30, so we're going to get started. First of all, I realized I have been forgetting to introduce myself on some of these webinars. My name is Katrina Perry. I am the Professional Development Consultant for the Office of School Nutrition here at NCDPI. And food safety is one of my subject matter areas. So that's why I'm doing this webinar for you all today, and that's why I've done the others in the series as well. I have a background in food safety, and so this is something that's been of much interest to me, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to share my knowledge and understanding of our HACCP plan templates with you all today. So, that being said, we've got a chat box if you have any questions, or you're welcome to, raise your hand in the webinar, and I'll keep an eye on that throughout the afternoon. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll stop periodically throughout the webinar so you can ask questions as well. And we'll also do questions at the end. All right, so this webinar today is on the Central Warehouse Plan. And the Central Warehouse Plan is designed for school food authorities that have a central warehouse to store and purchase USDA foods for distributions to each school site. So most of you, or many of you on this today, might have already attended the webinar for the commercial plan that we had earlier this summer. If you did, some of this information is going to be repeated, but also know that I'm trying to highlight the differences here between the commercial plan and the central warehouse plan as well. So there is some difference to share. And our goal in these webinars is to focus on the key areas of the HACCP plan template and how to use each section. So let's start by going back to the very beginning. Why do schools have a HACCP book or a HACCP plan in the first place? And in particular, why do we have a separate warehouse plan for our HACCP or for our central warehouse? First, the USDA requires that all school food authorities participating in the National School Lunch or School Breakfast Program have a food safety program for each of its food preparation and service facilities. Central warehouses that are owned or leased and operated by the school food authority that are used for servicing schools are also included in this requirement for a HACCP plan. The food safety program must be based on Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, or HACCP, principles and comply to guidance issued by the USDA. We will talk about HACCP in more detail shortly, but it includes receiving, storage, and transport of food, which can happen at the warehouse, as well as the preparation and service side, which happens in the kitchen. This is why it is important to have a HACCP plan for the central warehouse. Secondly, but most importantly, food safety is one of our top 3 priority areas. The safety of those we serve is our top priority, and we take it very, very seriously. Although food safety is not technically a PS1 or PS2 violation when it comes to an administrative review, our state will take action if there are severe food safety violations. The requirement to develop a food safety plan was included in the 2004 Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, and that has been implemented since 2006. The North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Office of School Nutrition, and North Carolina State University have developed templates for schools to customize and use at individual feeding sites, or in this case, for their central warehouse. The North Carolina HACCP plan templates meet the 2017 FDA Food Code, which has been adopted in North Carolina. The HACCP plan templates are reviewed and updated annually as needed to comply with food code and best practice updates. Revisions are generally highlighted for easy reference. There are 2 different sets of state regulations for food establishments that provide the basis for our HACCP plan templates. One set comes from our state general statutes. Your health inspector may refer to these as the 2600 rules. Among other things, these rules impact how inspection points and grades are assessed and provide the requirements for the person in charge. The first link will take you to these rules. The second link you see is to the North Carolina Food Code. As I said, North Carolina has adopted and is currently operating under the 2017 FDA Food Code, although there is a more recent version that has been issued by the FDA. The North Carolina Food Code guides the do's and don'ts for foods offered for sale in North Carolina. This is the document on which the food establishment permitting and inspection grades are based. A note about the FDA Food Code. The purpose of the Food Code is to safeguard public health and provide safe food to consumers. The FDA develops a model food code, which we refer to as the Food Code, and issues updates about every 4 years. States can choose to adopt the model FDA Food Code or develop their own food safety rules as long as they are consistent with the national food regulatory policy. So what is HACCP? HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point and is a systematic approach used to create a food safety program designed to analyze and control foodborne hazards by focusing on each step of the food preparation process from receiving all the way to service. Although not used for food preparation, a central warehouse is still an extension of a food preparation site since food is received and stored and then transported from a warehouse. This is part of the HACCP process. HACCP also includes monitoring, record keeping, and corrective actions as part of the process, and there are areas of the operation at the central warehouse that will need to have monitoring and record keeping activities as well as any corrective actions as needed. Some examples are temperature monitoring of refrigerated or frozen food, the facility, such as through pest and inventory management, and employee health. Lastly, the HACCP plan is designed to prevent foodborne illness rather than to react to an outbreak. When properly implemented, a HACCP-based food safety program will help ensure the safety of school meals served to children across North Carolina. You may have heard the term person in charge, or PIC, when talking about food safety and HACCP. This can be found in the Food Code and other food safety regulations. The Food Code defines a person in charge as the individual present at the food establishment who is responsible for the operation at the time of inspection. The person who serves as the PIC of the central warehouse is typically a warehouse manager or other employee having supervisory or management responsibility and the authority to direct and control the warehouse services. The Food Code also requires the person serving as the PIC to have a Certified Food Protection Manager certification, which we will talk about in more detail later. This does include the PIC for the central warehouse. NCDPI has 4 HACCP plan templates available for school food authorities to use. The first is the commercial plan, which is widely used for sites preparing and serving meals in a commercial type kitchen. The second template we have is the transported or catered meals template, and that is used for sites that receive meals that are transported from another kitchen. The home style kitchen template is used by some residential child care institutions or RCCIs with domestic style kitchens feeding students in a group home type setting. The template we're talking about today, the central warehouse template, is used by school food authorities with the central warehouse to store purchased and USDA foods for distributions to each school site. Even though a warehouse site does not prepare foods, food safety is very important during the storage and transport process and is subject to a HACCP plan and monitoring. As I said, we're reviewing the central warehouse plan in this webinar, but you may need more than one plan depending on your district's operations. So for example, districts that operate a central warehouse for storing school nutrition food and beverage items would need likely both a commercial plan for their self-prep school sites and also the central warehouse plan for their central warehouse. This slide shows where the HACCP plan templates are located on our website. As we said earlier, these templates are updated annually. Every year, each school food authority must download the templates and complete the information to make the plan specific to their facility or school. Visit the website shown here or scan the QR code with your phone or mobile device to get to this page. Feel free to download the parts of the template now and follow along with me as we go through each one of them. They are all available currently on our website. Now let's take a closer look at each part. Before we move into part 1, are there any questions that you all have at this point? Feel free to type them in the chat box or raise your hand. All right, well, let's move on then to, oh, we got one. If the central warehouse also includes a central kitchen for food prep, which HACCP plan do you use? That's a great question. I would still say you would need both. You would need for the warehouse portion, you would use your warehouse plan. And for the central kitchen, you would use the self-prep plan. So I would say plan to use both for that situation. Great question. Okay, well, now let's move on to part 1. The MASA part of our, the first part of our central warehouse HACCP plan template is really a comprehensive reference guide to safe food handling procedures, corrective actions, and more. Essentially, it's everything you didn't know you needed to know about food safety in your central warehouse. If you have a question about how to handle food safely or why it should be handled a certain way, Click here first for your answer. If you still don't know or need more clarification, contact me or your school nutrition consultant. Part 1, as we said, contains comprehensive information with helpful resources. This section does not have to be printed, although it must be easily accessible to employees in your central warehouse. For example, if it's stored electronically on the computer in the manager's office, staff must know how to find and open the file so they can find the information needed. This part contains the following reference and resource materials about food safety: prerequisite program standards, safe food handling procedures, and corrective action requirements. If you attended the commercial plan webinar, one thing you may immediately notice is that unlike the commercial plan template, there are no environmental health position statements or allergen information in part 1 of the warehouse HACCP plan. Now we're going to go through a little bit more about each of these sections of part 1. So like the commercial plan, prerequisite programs are the foundation of the food safety program, providing the basic requirements for maintaining the things that are needed to store the food: facilities, equipment, and smallwares, and the people. Safe food handling procedures are what needs to be done to ensure food is handled safely. These are the day-to-day actions around handling the food itself. For the central warehouse, this is mainly related to receiving, storage, and transport of food. If corrective actions are what to do if there's a problem. So if the prerequisite programs or safe food handling procedures are not followed correctly. Oops. Prerequisite programs include food code requirements, other state regulations, USDA requirements, state agency requirements, and best practices. It covers the following areas listed here on the slide. I won't read this full list, but you will notice that the last bullet here is unique to the central warehouse plan, which is why it is shown in bold. Guidance is provided for developing a food defense plan, which you will see again in Part 2A. We will talk about that defense plan a bit more when we get to that section. Like the commercial plan template, the warehouse plan template does also address the disposition and care of the facility, equipment and smallwares, and also employees. Although food is not prepared in a central warehouse, employees are subject to the same health, personal hygiene, and continuing education standards as those in the kitchen. We will talk more about these standards in Part 4. Also, the facility must be similarly maintained and equipment must meet certain standards. Safe food handling procedures is pretty self-explanatory. These are what needs to be done to ensure the food is handled safely. In other words, those day-to-day actions around handling the food itself. Safe food handling procedures are divided into several categories as shown on the slide: purchasing and receiving, different types of storage, preparation related to ice only, and transporting, as well as bodily fluid cleanup. It also includes reference material like appendices on everything from criteria for accepting a delivery to shelf life guidance to bodily fluid cleanup procedures, among other topics. Corrective actions are what to do if a standard is not met. In other words, if there's an issue with controlling a potential hazard. So this could occur if prerequisite programs or safe food handling procedures are not followed correctly or at all. Corrective actions are based on the critical control points and critical limits established in the safe food handling procedures. This is part of the HACCP process, so as part of the HACCP plan, we have to include corrective actions. If you have an issue with a safe food handling or a prerequisite procedure not working properly or being followed, go to the corrective actions section of Part 1 to see how to address the issue and how to fix it. I've included some topics that we commonly receive questions about and where you can find information in the central warehouse HACCP plan template. Food safety continuing education requirements. Those are in the prerequisite program section. Shelf life guidance, we often get questions on that. That is in Part 1 in the kind of the additional resources section. Power outages and food safety recalls, we often have questions about those as well, and those have more information in the safe food handling procedures section as part of those additional materials. I do want to make a note about the food safety recall sample operating procedures. It is important to know how to react if food in your program is recalled or if there's a potential outbreak or an actual one of foodborne illness. It is also important for your school nutrition program to develop standard operating procedures for how to handle these situations from start to finish. Depending on the issue, your central warehouse could be impacted as well, such as if a recalled product was received by the central warehouse. The procedure must include identifying, isolating, and returning or destroying the food item in question, as well as record keeping to document these actions. The sample food recall standard operating procedure located in Part 1 is a great resource for starting this process. Now we're ready to move on to Part 2. Does anyone have any questions about Part 1? Okay. Oops, sorry for all the windows popping up. All right, I'm not seeing any questions now, but again, there will be more opportunities to do questions at the end. So now let's move on to Part 2. A few years ago, we split Part 2 to identify sections that had to be completed again each year versus those that only need to be updated as information changes. Part 2A is the section that only needs to be revised each year if the information in it changes, and this is why we call it the annual revision. Part 2 is split into two subparts, Part 2A and 2B. So this is Part 2A, the annual revision, which contains the following information: food safety team, central warehouse description facility, personnel and food safety certifications, master cleaning schedule, equipment and fixed assets and maintenance schedule, purchasing and delivery information, hazard communications, and the food defense plan that I mentioned earlier. If information changes during the year after you've already reviewed this section, you can update it again, but that's not required. However, updating it as it changes or periodically throughout the year can help your consultant and reviewer to better understand your operation. Developing a food defense plan is included in Part 2A. Your SFA will still want to develop this plan and revise it annually as needed, just like other sections of Part 2A. Let's start by explaining what we mean by food defense. Well, I can tell you it's not saving your SFA against the attack of the killer tomatoes. Food defense is putting measures into place, reducing the chances of the food supply from becoming intentionally contaminated using a variety of chemicals, biological agents, or other harmful substances by people who want to do us harm. These agents could include materials not naturally occurring or substances not routinely tested for in food products. A terrorist's goal might be to kill people, disrupt our economy, or ruin your business. Intentional acts generally occur infrequently and can be difficult to detect and are hard to predict. Food defense is not the same as food safety. Food safety addresses the accidental contamination of food products during storage and transportation and focuses on the biological, chemical, or physical hazards. The main types of food safety hazards are microbes, chemicals, and foreign objects. Products can become contaminated through negligence and can occur during storage and transportation. Some of the information you will use to create your food defense plan will already exist in your HACCP plan and other documents relating to emergency response procedures, such as that sample recall procedure that I just mentioned. Consult these documents for information. There is no need to reinvent the wheel when developing your food defense plan. A food defense plan helps you identify steps you can take to minimize the risk food products in your establishment will be intentionally contaminated or tampered with. A plan increases preparedness. Although the plan should be in place always, it may be particularly helpful during emergencies. During a crisis, when stress is high and response time is at a premium, a documented set of procedures improves your ability to respond quickly. A food defense plan will help you maintain a safe working environment for your employees, provide a safe product to your consumers, and protect your school food authority. By using this guide, you will be able to develop a food defense plan specific to your facility. And the guide that I'm mentioning is in Part 1 of the HACCP plan, and it's also provided in Part 2A as a template. Do keep in mind that not all the guidance contained in this document may be appropriate or practical for every warehouse and distribution center. So you should review the information and the guidance on developing a food defense plan and assess which preventative measures are suitable for your operation. You should also determine the most cost-effective way to achieve food defense goals based on your facility's situation. It is important to remember that no one-size-fits-all approach will fit when creating your food defense plan. The plan can be as long or as short as is appropriate for your operation. And I see another question that came through, but I will answer that when we get to our next stopping point. So developing a food defense plan, you can use the following 3 steps when you develop your plan. You can start by conducting a food defense assessment. Then you can move on to develop your food defense plan. And finally, we want to make sure we are able to implement the food defense plan if needed. I won't go into detail for each step today, but each is outlined in more detail in Part 1 of your HACCP plan. A template for the food defense plan is available in Part 2A. If you follow and complete these steps and use the forms provided as a template in the warehouse HACCP plan, you will have developed a food defense plan for your facility. So we've got some reminders for Part 2A, the annual revision. First, the person that you indicate as a team leader or person in charge must have a current Certified Food Protection Manager certification, which we alluded to a little bit earlier. Make sure the food safety team and Certified Food Protection Manager sections are consistent. Next, because you are receiving items and or storing them at the central warehouse, you also need to maintain a copy of your non-domestic list and your vendors lists as part of your warehouse HACCP plan. Those you will put in this section. In addition to listing any hazardous chemicals, it is important to conduct hazard communications training at least once each year with warehouse staff. This training should review the location of safety data sheets or SDS information and how to use it. Please do not overlook this section. It does ask for the dates of training. Substitute and temporary employees also need to be shown this information on their first day. We just discussed this, but it's easy to overlook the food defense plan as well, since it is unique to the warehouse HACCP plan template. So don't forget about this part of the plan. It does take a team effort to complete Part 2A. Some of this information will most likely come from the central office. This includes information on equipment and fixed assets, equipment preventative maintenance, vacuum packed TCS foods, the non-domestic products list, vendor list, and other information. Additional information will come from the warehouse site itself, which can be provided by the warehouse manager or supervisor. You may have other questions about the facility that you cannot answer, so reach out to your facilities or maintenance team to assist you with those. Fortunately, you only have to revise this section as needed. Unlike Part 2A, Part 2B will need to be completed from scratch each year, and this is why we call Part 2B the annual completion. So Part 2B is called the annual completion, as I said, because information must be completed from scratch each year. And this subpart includes the operation assessment and HACCP verification. The operation assessment includes assessments of food items and inventory, the food defense plan, and pest control practices. To ensure all forms are completed and other necessary documents are included in the HACCP plan, you can use the HACCP checklist on our webpage for this, and do know that we are currently updating the warehouse plan HACCP checklist and hope to make that available soon on our website. Part 2B has 2 types of what I call assessments that you'll need to complete each year. The first is the annual operation assessment. This is a great way to review your operation to make sure it is working well from a food safety standpoint. In other words, are food safety standards being met? An operation assessment must be performed every year before or at the beginning of the school year. This assessment will typically take between 1 to 2 hours to complete and can be done over multiple days. Some standards will need to be assessed in conjunction with maintenance staff. Responses can be handwritten or typed. Include only the current year's operation assessment form in this section. The second is the HACCP verification. This evaluates your HACCP plan to make sure it is helping control for potential food safety hazards effectively. Verification is defined as the process of evaluating the HACCP plan to determine whether the standards are being properly implemented, monitored, and observations recorded. Usually, the warehouse manager or person in charge of the warehouse will complete the HACCP verification. Complete the form and file it, the most recent verification, in this section. If you complete these at the end of the previous school year, make sure to file them in the current year's HACCP book. In other words, if you complete HACCP verification for school year 23-24 at the end of that year, then file it with the 23-24 HACCP book. Alternatively, you could complete the operation assessment for school year 23-24 at the beginning of the following school year, which would be 24-25, but still file that with the 23-24 HACCP book. Before we get to part 3, are there any other questions? And I will address the one in the chat. It says, what items are considered fixed assets? Do computers, printers, large office equipment, and non-food prep items need to be included? Fixed assets are generally equipment that you can't move around. So something that's kind of built in, that's difficult to move. But let me follow up with the person who asked that privately, and I'll get you a more clear information on what is considered a fixed asset. Okay, well, let's move on to part 3. Just going to do one quick check to make sure no one has their hand raised. All right. So part 3 contains almost all of the forms and logs, as well as the complete instructions guide for how to use them. The forms and logs in this section are for monitoring to ensure the safe food handling procedures and prerequisite program standards are being met. Part 3 contains the following monitoring forms: daily, weekly, and monthly forms, as well as needed forms. Not all kitchens and not all warehouses will need to complete all of the forms depending on your operation. So you are welcome to contact your school nutrition consultant or myself with any questions about what form to use. Part 3 monitoring log instructions file is probably the most overlooked document we've seen this past year. Previously, the instructions for each log were provided with the log itself as several pages before the actual log. So they were, in a way, introducing the log. We moved the instructions for all the logs into a single file to condense the information and help save on printing costs. However, we're finding that it's possible that people aren't reading the logs completely, because we have had a lot of questions on how to complete them. So the shortened instructions or notes that are included on many of the actual logs themselves are great, but they're more meant as reminders and don't always give a complete picture as to how the log should be completed. Please read these instructions before completing the log or providing training on how to complete it. It should answer most of the questions that you have, and you shouldn't need to rely on the footnotes in the shortened instructions unless you just need a quick reminder. This is a complete list of all of the monitoring logs and forms in Part 3 of the Warehouse HACCP plan. You'll notice that there are much fewer forms and logs than for the commercial plan, since there is no food preparation in a central warehouse. Now let's review the daily warehouse assessment, since this is the one where we get the most questions. One clarification I want to note is that there's no need to measure the water temperature every day. The instructions state, occasionally use a metal stem thermometer to measure the temperature of the water so you know what warm water feels like. Afterwards, you can simply feel if the water is warm rather than measuring an actual temperature. If warm water is available, mark Y. If no, mark N. For the upcoming school year, we have updated the language in the log to clarify these instructions, as highlighted on the screen. Also, in the column for wipe spray-on sanitizer, make sure you are indicating the concentration in parts per million, or ppm. If the concentration is in the correct range, then record the ppm in this cell. If not, adjust the amount of sanitizer or water in the container for the correct concentration and note this in the corrective actions column. If the containers are refilled during the day, the sanitizer concentration must be checked but not recorded. And this is all within the instructions for the daily warehouse assessment. I'd like to share a few tips for completing the monitoring log successfully. First, please read the instructions file before completing a log for the first time and before providing any training to others on completing a monitoring log. This will help make sure it is being done consistently and accurately across your team. Make sure to write the month and year at the top of the log in the space provided. This is important for our documentation, especially since this information is no longer being pre-filled. Include the units of measure where indicated. For example, on the daily warehouse assessment form, make sure to record a concentration such as ppm or parts per million for the wipe spray-on sanitizer. If you have multiple pieces of the same type of equipment, for example, a walk-in cooler, make sure to indicate which log is for which piece of equipment. You could designate each one with a number, a letter, or a color. For example, you could number it Cooler 1 or Cooler A. It may be best to avoid putting a location as the indicator, such as cooler by office, in case it is too vague or the point of reference gets moved, because you're probably not going to move a walk-in cooler. It's also a good idea to keep extra blank copies of the log for each equipment or each purpose on hand for quickly transitioning to the next month, or if something happens to an existing log and it needs to be replaced. We also recommend organizing the logs in a way that best meets the needs of your school or district. Some examples could be keeping logs for each type of equipment in a sheet protector taped to that piece of equipment, or putting all logs together in a binder or notebook kept in the manager's office, or some other method. And for those of you that are in districts, you might find you need to use a different method for each warehouse, or excuse me, for your warehouse versus for your school sites. Are there any questions about part 3 before we move on to part 4? All right, I did see one come through. Should we include temperatures on refrigerated trucks? And is a refrigerated truck listed as equipment? That is a great question. I think that may depend on whether the truck is owned by the school food authority or whether it is a delivery truck from your vendor. But let me follow up with you offline about that, and we can figure out what is best needed for your school food authority. And as you all are probably seeing from some of these questions, it's, everyone is in a unique situation. So sometimes it's better to address these questions one-on-one, and because the guidance may be different depending on your situation. All right, part 4 of the HACCP plan is dedicated to understanding and documenting required continuing education in the area of food safety. This is also where employees must review and sign the Employee Health Policy Agreement and Employee Food Safety Checklist each year. It is important to note that while it's not required that documentation of completed food safety continuing education be filed in this section, part 4, it does need to be available for a reviewer whenever requested, whether it's an NCDPI staff member, such as on a TA or an AR, or by a local health inspector. You could also file this information with other USDA professional standards documentation. Part 4 contains all continuing education and professional development training documents for employees. The Employee Health Policy Agreement and Food Safety Checklist for employees must be completed for each employee every year. The Food Safety Checklist is now required for all employees annually, not just when they are hired. If not maintained with your HACCP notebook, we recommend keeping documentation of food safety or HACCP continuing education with your professional standards documentation, as we've said already. Copies of signed employee health policy agreements, food safety checklists for employees, and food safety and HACCP continuing education can also be kept in Part 4 of the HACCP plan. There are several forms available for Part 4. There are both English and Spanish versions of both the Employee Health Policy Agreement form and the Food Safety Checklist for employees. The Employee Health Policy Agreement form is the form that a local health inspector would look for, and we'll go over this form in more detail soon. Even though you might not have a local health inspector visit your warehouse, it is still important for warehouse employees to sign this agreement. There is another Employee Health Policy Agreement template that includes the agreement that we just mentioned, as well as a longer explanation of the policy. And this is also available if SFAs wish to adopt the complete policy for their school or district. The Food Safety and HACCP Continuing Education Report form can be used as a template to record completed hours of food safety and HACCP-related continuing education. If used, you can compile it here in this part of the HACCP plan or with your professional standards documentation. A substitute employee list template is also available for helping identify regular substitutes and making sure they've completed the necessary food safety forms. According to the Food Code, each food establishment must have a written employee health policy agreement to ensure employees or conditional employees notify the person in charge when they experience any of the symptoms, exposures, and diagnoses that are transmissible through food, so that the person in charge can take appropriate steps to prevent the transmission of foodborne illness. This employee health policy document explains which symptoms and illnesses employees must report and is a tool to help the PIC to comply with the requirements outlined in the North Carolina Food Code. Even though the incidence of foodborne illness in school nutrition programs is low, there are still risks. Foodborne illness prevention begins with properly trained staff not working when they're sick, with vomiting, diarrhea, sore throat with fever or jaundice, or if they have been diagnosed with a reportable communicable disease. The PIC should continue to promote and reinforce awareness of this policy to all food employees on a regular basis to ensure compliance. The PIC should train employees annually on the employee health policy and ensure that each food handler signs a new copy every year. Keep signed copies of the employee health policy agreements on file. Each of our North Carolina HACCP plan templates includes a copy of the employee health policy agreement, as we've said, both English and Spanish versions. But if you're having trouble finding it, you can always reach out to me or your school nutrition consultant. Let's briefly review what the person in charge or PIC must do if an employee shows signs of any of the symptoms listed on the slide. If an employee shows signs of these symptoms, they need to be sent home immediately because they could contaminate food and cause a foodborne illness. Documentation such as the employee illness log must be completed when employees are sent home. Having this documentation is extremely important, especially if a foodborne illness outbreak occurs. Keep in mind that diarrhea and vomiting from non-infectious conditions do not apply to this policy. However, a physician should make the diagnosis of the non-infectious condition causing the diarrhea and vomiting, and the employee should provide written documentation to the person in charge indicating the condition is non-infectious. The employee must report exposure to or diagnosis to any of the following foodborne pathogens that are listed here on the slide. We call these the Big Six. They are norovirus, hepatitis A virus, Salmonella typhi, Shigella, E. coli, and non-typhoidal salmonella. These pathogens are identified as being highly infectious and are easily transmitted to food by sick employees. According to the Food Code, it is the responsibility of the person in charge to report to the health department when an employee is diagnosed with one of these 6 illnesses shown here. We recognize that the school nutrition program, food establishments, and the central warehouse as an extension of that is often a little different than a traditional food establishment in terms of the chain of command. We are advising that warehouse managers or the person in charge of the warehouse communicate any of these required illnesses or exposures to their school nutrition director. And from there, you all can decide the best way to reach out to your health department with that information. Continuing education and training is an important part of your HACCP plan. Educational opportunities should be specific to the operation. It should include an overview of the safe food handling procedures, the prerequisite programs, how the standards will be monitored, and on what forms observations are to be recorded. Different amounts and types of training are required depending on the staff level. Warehouse managers or the person in charge of the warehouse must hold a Certified Food Protection Manager certification, which we will talk about in more detail shortly. All staff, including the warehouse manager, must receive at least 4 hours of food safety continuing education every 3 to 5 years. Generally, this can include any 15-minute or longer food safety trainings, whether in person or online, such as back-to-school training on food safety, managers' meetings that cover food safety, online modules, or even a preparation course for taking or recertifying your Certified Food Protection Manager certification. Temporary staff, substitutes, and volunteers who handle food should receive food safety training to provide at least a basic or targeted food safety training relevant to the job duties being performed. It is also recommended to provide hazard communications and pesticide or pest management continuing education as it is relevant to employee job duties. There are several continuing education resources that are available for food safety continuing education. The Safe Plates for School Nutrition Staff is a 6-module course which provides 4 hours of professional development. You may remember this course as HACCP in your schools, but they have rebranded to Safe Plates for School Nutrition Staff, or SNS, as you see here on the slide. There are an additional 4 hours in this course, which can be completed for a total of 8 hours of instruction. This course has been approved by the School Nutrition Association for their Food Safety Core course for their certification program. And completing the entire 8 hours of instruction will provide the required credit for food safety for that certification. This online course is available on our website under Continuing Education and Professional Development. Another well-known option is the Food Safety in Schools curriculum from the Institute of Child Nutrition. You may remember it as Serving It Safe. This instructor-led course provides 6 lessons in basic food safety. Participant and instructor resources are available for download from ICN's website. One more option is our short module series, No Time to Teach. Each lesson is 15 minutes and there are a total of 13 lessons. These lessons are also instructor-led and are up on our website, although they may be unavailable at times because we are in the process of updating them. The North Carolina Food Code also requires a person in charge who has obtained a Certified Food Protection Manager certification to be present at any time the food establishment is open for business. Even in a warehouse, it is recommended that at least 2 people operating the warehouse obtain the certification to be in compliance with the code in the event that one is absent or not available. It is important to point out that the exam and not the course provides the certification. Although participation in a course is not required, it often increases the exam passing rate, especially for those who have not taken the exam before. Some courses that are commonly offered include Safe Plates for Managers, which is offered through North Carolina State University and North Carolina Cooperative Extension. The Serve Safe course for managers as well, which is approved by the National Restaurant Association Educational Foundation. And there are a variety of other online course options as well. Now let's look at the course requirement, or the certification requirements. All exams must be approved by the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. These approved exams are currently offered by the following organizations listed here on the slide. The courses that you saw before often include one of these exams from these organizations as part of the course. But it is important to note that the North Carolina Food Code does not require taking a preparation course, but it does require passing the exam for the certification. Are there any questions about part 4 before we move on to our last part? And I did see someone noted that they did have to leave. We are recording this webinar, and we will make this available on our website after the webinar is over. So you all are welcome to review this at a later time if you have any questions or any of the other webinars that you may have wanted to attend and weren't able to. All right. So part 5 is the last section of the HACCP, the warehouse HACCP plan, and is for conducting an inventory of items stored at the warehouse. In a central warehouse, process HACCP is handled differently than in a school kitchen. It is based on sorting food items into one of 2 categories: time temperature control for safety, or TCS, and non-TCS. Each category has a set of food safety standards to follow for keeping food safe to eat. We use these 2 categories to help complete the warehouse inventory. To go along with the process of separating TCS and non-TCS foods as part of conducting an inventory, there are two forms available to record the items in each category. These are in your Part 5 forms. The first is the Food Item Inventory Summary for TCS foods, and the second is the Food Item Inventory Summary for non-TCS foods. Each summary form must be reviewed before the beginning of each school year to be certain it is current. After it is complete, file in the HACCP binder and use multiple copies of the form if necessary. Like other sections of the HACCP plan template, this may be kept electronically. I want to share a few quick housekeeping things about our HACCP plan templates that may help you in your journey to HACCP plan transcendence. Most pages have a date of last update. Check to make sure you are using the most current version. They are typically updated in late spring or early summer. For example, the templates for next school year, which would be school year 2024-2025, will have April, May, June, or July of 2024. The ones that you have been using this year will have April, May, June, or July of 2023. It is important to use the most current version each year for all of the pages because we make updates based on a variety of reasons, but sometimes for important food code or other regulatory changes. Your SFA may choose to keep some of the parts of the HACCP plan template electronic, and this is fine as long as the following are still met. All of the information is completed and original copies are retained per record storage requirements. And secondly, that managers and staff and others know where to find and how to access the information. Each section of all of the forms comes with some type of instructions. Most of the forms have a few notes on the form itself, but additional instructions are also in the instructions or reference section of that part of the HACCP plan template. We strongly encourage you and your staff to read all of the instructions to make sure that sections of the HACCP plan template are being completed correctly. And last but not least, if you have a question about anything in the HACCP plan template, or your discerning eye catches something you think may need to be fixed, please let me know. Please try to look at the instructions first before reaching out. They may just answer your question and save an extra email or phone call. These plans are working documents that we review and update each year. In addition to correcting a few minor grammar and spelling issues, we only had one major change to note in the upcoming year's Central Warehouse HACCP plan template. The language is in the daily warehouse assessment log and has been updated for clarification around assessing the water temperature, which we reviewed earlier. I also wanted to share a few tips and reminders for avoiding HACCP findings, since I know many of us are always focused on maintaining compliance and preparing for our next administrative review or technical assistance visit. With help from your central office, put together a new HACCP book or folder for each school year. You may not need to print everything, but make sure to download the new copy each year and use that for your school year. Keep the old versions on file for 3 years plus the current year or more strict record retention policies you may have locally. Make sure all areas of the HACCP plan template are completed each year. That includes parts 2A, 2B, part 3 monitoring logs, part 4 forms, and any forms in part 5 as well. Part 2B only needs to be revised as information changes, but keep the original version and make a copy for each school year so you don't lose the original information. Keep in mind that all school food authorities should fully complete the HACCP plan templates with all required information and follow the procedures to have a fully functioning HACCP plan in place. This includes a warehouse plan for your central warehouse. To make sure the areas needing to be completed are done correctly, make sure to read and follow the instructions for completing each section or log. Note and follow any local practices that are more strict. If you have any questions about how to complete a log correctly, you're welcome to reach out to me or your school nutrition consultant. Develop a food safety defense plan and review it annually. It is unlikely you will ever need to use it, but it is an important part of protecting the food served to your students. Make sure your Certified Food Protection Manager certification stays current, even for those of you who are warehouse managers. They are good for 5 years and should have an issue and/or expiration date. There are several organizations that provide opportunities to get this certification, which we've already discussed. Last and most importantly, follow safe food handling practices. Make sure you are handling food safely as described in Part 1 of your HACCP plan, that prerequisite program section and safe food handling practices section. If you have questions, use Part 1 to help you answer them. And if you still aren't sure, you're welcome to reach out to me or your school nutrition consultant. Keep good records and logs is important, and it supports that you and your staff handled food safely, especially in the event that someone gets sick and thinks your school nutrition program may be to blame. That brings us to the end of our Warehouse HACCP webinar. Are there any additional questions? Feel free to raise your hand and unmute, or you're welcome to type them in the chat as well. And again, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website, and we will reach out when it is available for later viewing. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. If you have any questions or think of anything later, you're welcome to reach out to me. I apologize, I did not put my contact information here in this presentation, but if you look at the announcement or the registration form, you should find at least an email in there for me as well. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your week, and I'm going to stop the recording in the webinar now.